Well, hello, and welcome to our teaser for An Evening with Carole Adrienne. My name is Pete Mealy. I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director of Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center and as the President of the Seminary Ridge Historic Preservation Foundation. We're really thrilled to talk just briefly to Carole about her new book, Healing a Divided Nation: How the American Civil War Revolutionized Western Medicine. And Carole will be traveling to Gettysburg on March 8th to come and speak a little bit more. But I thought it would be good to talk to her a little bit and just kind of get a little information about her background and talk a little bit about what she's going to talk about on March 8th. So thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks, Pete. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you so much.
So, Carole, tell us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in this subject and eventually turned into a book.
Well, I'm a documentary filmmaker by trade, and I actually stumbled across the story of Civil War medicine. My mom was a journalist in Philadelphia, and one night she told me that Philadelphia has more Civil War statuary than any city in the country, which I found really surprising. I didn't know too much about that era, but I knew uniforms were made
Mm-hmm.
here. I knew no battles had been fought in Philadelphia. So I was working on another documentary and at the Central Library in Philadelphia, and I Googled Philadelphia Civil War, and what emerged was a story of Civil War medicine. And Philadelphia, the two large medical schools in Philadelphia, Jefferson University and University of Pennsylvania, trained most of the doctors, North and South. And the story was so huge and so riveting that I had to abandon what I was working on and dive deep into that story.
Wow. Do you have I know I have a favorite doctor, and you reference him a couple of times in the book. But do you have a favorite doctor from the Civil War?
I love William Williams
Yes,
King.
he's my
Oh,
favorite too.
really?
Yeah.
He had such a dark sense of humor, brilliant and cutting and funny. And I love that he served in the Civil War. You
Yeah.
probably know this, Pete, at age 23 with a little less than 2 years worth of medical training. And he served again in uniform at age
Mhm.
80 in World War One.
So I became interested in him one day doing research on Franklin Roosevelt and finding out that he was one of the first doctors on the scene at Campobello Island when Roosevelt had couldn't get out of bed. And 2 summers ago, I got to stand in that bedroom. My wife and I visited Campobello Island, and I was more interested in the fact that Keene had been there than that Roosevelt had been there. I might be the only person, but it was interesting. Yeah, I think he's a great guy. So the byline is how the Civil War revolutionized Western medicine, and I was wondering if you could just briefly, because we don't want to give too much away, how did the Civil War revolutionize Western medicine?
Well, since we're going to be at Gettysburg, which is one of the most prime and horrific examples of what went on, with in excess of 50,000 casualties during that 3 day battle. And we don't know how many people died afterwards of
Mm-hmm.
their wounds. But it, it really, I was thinking about what forced this incredible movement of medicine when you realize that the medicine of 1861 was almost identical to the medicine of 1761. There really had been very few medical advances. And suddenly, with all those changes and all those casualties, that people leapt into action. Also, at the time of the Civil War, it is estimated that fewer than 300 doctors in the
Mm-hmm.
entire country, North and South, had ever witnessed surgery or seen a human gunshot wound. So they were coming from pretty much flat nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And things were pulled from what the Europeans had discovered and experimented with. but the gigantic movement of, especially the volunteer movement
Mm-hmm.
of medicine, influenced all of the West for really till now.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear an ambulance siren coming down the street, Civil War medicine.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you take that approach, that it's not just that it's revolutionizing American medicine, that it's Western medicine, that there's this back and forth across the Atlantic that I, I think has been undertold. I also really appreciate that you tell a more inclusive story. That so many times when we hear about doctors, we're only focused on white male doctors, and of course many of them were. But tell us just maybe briefly about some of the other people that you found that are getting medical degrees and practicing.
Well, one of the revolutionary things that occurred during the Civil War was that the entire cultural and social landscape of women and African Americans was dramatically changed forever. And not to say that everything was addressed and dealt with and resolved, but it brought everybody into a brand new arena. So, as best we know, the first 13 degreed African American doctors served in the Civil War. Most of them had obtained their medical educations in Canada because they were not permitted to enroll in American medical schools. And women who were pretty much resigned to running
Mm-hmm.
households and not really working. In terms of working, the only really respectable place for a woman was teaching. But these women were not accepting those limitations, and they poured onto the battlefields and into
Mm-hmm.
the hospitals. I think one thing I ran across that sums it up, after the Battle of Shiloh, one of the biggest ones in the South, there were huge numbers of casualties. And 40 women from the Confederacy, who had probably never been more than a mile or two from their homes, banded together, got on a train, and went to Shiloh to help. And at the first hastily set up hospital they reached, they presented themselves to help in this horrible situation. And a white male doctor, the head of that hospital, refused them entrance, saying, "No more flies or women will be admitted."
Wow.
So
There's
that,
a it's a similar story in Gettysburg. The Patriot Daughters of Lancaster appear at Christ Lutheran Church down on Chambersburg Street. They're not denied admittance, but they write later on that the doctors didn't think much of them when they first showed up. But eventually, once they get into the hospital and start doing what they're doing, that the doctors begin to see certainly the value. But I didn't know that story about Shiloh. See, that's why we're looking forward to having you come. Well, I want to thank you. I don't want to give away too much, so there is a link in the comments section of this. We hope that you will come and hear more from Carole Adrienne on Friday, March 8th. It's going to be up here on the Ridge in Valentine Hall. We will have copies of the book to sell, and I'm really looking forward. I'm sort of a Civil War medicine buff, but I look forward to hearing you speak and learning more and taking you through the museum and showing you what we have to offer. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to see you on the Ridge soon.